Okay, so you've been producing for a while now, maybe a few months, maybe even a few years, and don't get me wrong, you're making decent progress. But you have a problem. No matter what you try, all your songs end up sounding the same. They're just repetitive, lifeless, and lacking emotion. Don't worry. I used to be exactly the same as you, and I promise it doesn't have to be this way. I'm going to show you everything you need to take an average sounding track like this and turn it into something that will catch the attention of your listeners and get stuck in their head for days. Sound good? Then let's break it down. But before we get into it, do one thing for me. I'm super interested at the moment in what got you into production or making music in the first place. Like, was it working with your favorite artists, getting financial success, just a simple creative outlet, or something else entirely? Drop a comment down below with your thoughts and let's get into it in the comments. On with the video. The first thing we're going to work on to bring a bit more life to this track that we started with is the chords. Right now, our chords are just simple major and minor chords. We've got an F sharp minor right here, go into an E, go into a D, go into an A. So the first thing we're going to do is spice those chords up a bit. How are we going to do this? We are going to use chord extensions. So a normal major or minor chord is made up of a root note, a third, and a fifth. We are going to go above and add some sevenths in there. You can also add ninths and elevenths. Each of these extensions will give it a slightly different sound. For instance, if you have a ninth on a minor chord, it will sound really smoky and jazzy. Elevenths add even more tension. But for this track, I think sevenths will be perfect. So what are we going to do to add the sevenths? So on this F sharp minor, we have the fifth here, C sharp. And we just want to go 3 notes above that to an E to find the seventh. So if you're ever unsure about how to find the seventh of a chord, you just take the fifth and count up either 3 or 4 semitones. In this case, we're going to count up 3. We're going to move this top note down, which is just playing a simple F sharp. That's just the root note above the chord, down to the E to play the seventh. And let's hear how that sounds. You can see that's already a much more moody, emotional sounding chord. So let's go back to the F sharp and try out the E again. Oh, it's a big difference already. Okay, so we're going to do that for the rest of our chords as well. We're going to get this E, take this down to a D sharp. You can see it's making an E major 7. Same with the D. And with this A, we're going to actually move the A down to a G sharp, because you don't always have to have the seventh at the top. You can also have it in the middle of the chord, so that's going to change the sound slightly again. So let's hear how that's sounding. It's already a lot more emotional. So moving on, we are going to change up the harmonic rhythm of the chords. Right now, these chords are just holding out for the whole time, but I want to make them a bit more choppy and give it more groove and make it fit in with the drums. You can either just chop the chords manually and just cut them up like that, or if you want a bit more flexibility, what I recommend doing is using a gate plugin which is triggered by MIDI, and then you can control exactly where your chords are going to sound and where they're not going to sound. So let's get into that. All right, I've just set up this gate so that we can play with the harmonic rhythm of our chords, and it's sounding a little bit like this right now with the gate. And if you want to do exactly the same thing and set up your own gated sidechain effect, this is how you do it. You get your audio track here, load up a gate on it, set up the external sidechain, however you do that in your DAW. And then you want to get your MIDI track. I'm just using a sample, and all I've done is just load a noise sample in there. You want to set the output of your MIDI track to the input of the sidechain of your gate plugin. And that will mean that instead of the gate being triggered by its normal threshold, it'll be triggered whenever your MIDI note plays. So if you notice here, I've just clicked in these MIDI notes, and that's what makes it sound. If I turn off the gate plugin, it's kind of boring. So that's given us a ton more groove, and it's super easy to get like a rhythm that fits with the drums. So now we've got the rhythm of these chords sounding really good and fitting with our drums, but the sound itself is sounding just a little bit flat. could use a bit more depth. So we're going to do some layering here. This is our next trick to make your song sound less boring. So we are just going to drag this MIDI we already have from here over to this analog lab, and we're going to get a new sound in there. Now we can mess around with the sounds in Analog Lab freely and try and layer this up and get something cool in. Now to layer up even more, we're going to add another sound. Going to get a Rhodes piano in there. Okay, now we've layered this, we want to make it actually fit together, so we need to get some EQ on there just to shape some of these sounds a little bit. For the Rhodes, we just really want the high end, just adding a nice little bed to the sounds. Now our attention turns to the drums. The drum groove is a really cool groove, but it's lacking that punch and impact, so let's change that. Adding life to your drums will make your track sound so much more exciting, so much more danceable, and much less boring. So when we're mixing our drums to get extra life and punching them, there's a few things that are usually going to work out pretty well. And those things are some compression, some saturation, and at times some EQ. So let's go through how we're going to add all of those to our drum bus. So we're going to start off with the drums with no effects on them. And bit by bit, we're going to shape the whole sound of the drums. And this is a great way to add a bit of extra dynamics and excitement to your mix, to your track. Get it sounding like you think a finished record would. So let's break it down. So first off, what we're going to add is some bus compression using this Townhouse bus compressor. It's based on a famous SSL G compressor from old school consoles, which cost about £1 million. So we're going to use the plugin today. And it sounds a little bit like this. Take it off. See, the drums are just pulling forward in the mix a little bit more, and they're a little bit more clear and punchy. So once we got that locked in, we're going to switch up to some saturation. For this, we're going to go to an old school tape machine, Studio A800. If you don't have this, you can use isotope vinyl tape, and it'll do the same thing. So with the Studer, we're just adding a subtle bit of rounding of the high end and making things sound a bit more smooth. So without it, it sounds like this. And then when we put it back in again, it's like this. Next up, we have a UAD Pultec, boosting a little bit of low end and a little bit of 3K. So what this is doing is just accenting the kick and the clap, so the two most important elements of the groove, and we're just bringing those forward in the mix and letting them groove a little bit more. Last on the bus, we have some decapitator saturation. Not too much mix, but without that, it sounds like this. And with it, oh yeah, you can feel the kick punching through more there immediately. Adding a bit of thickness. We don't even need the mix on too high an amount. If we put it all the way up, it's crazy overblown, so let's undo that. Now on a track level, we've also got some EQ on the kick here. Just a Pro Q3, doing a little boost around the bottom and cutting out some boxiness around 500 Hertz, and without it, it sounds like this. And then with it, just cleaning it up, letting it punch more, letting it do what it's supposed to do, which is make you feel it in the chest. We're doing a similar thing on the clap. Just taking off a small bit of top end, stopping it punching through quite as much, getting it nicely balanced in the mix. Without it, it sounds like this. And with it, just rolling up those highs a little bit. So lastly, we've got a room reverb. It's emulating a rich tracking studio, so it's just giving a little bit of ambience and space to the drum. So if we switch that into the mix, it's like this. Without. It's pretty subtle, but it just gives that slight sense of space and excitement that you don't get without it. So, doing a little before and after of all of our drums. If we turn everything off, we have this. And with everything back on, we have this. as you can see, we're getting that punch and excitement, making things sound more like a record. And as I said, the keys to this are some compression, some saturation, and if it needs it, some EQ. You don't always need the EQ. Today I went for it, but it's all about what the song needs. So there's one super important thing we haven't touched on yet, which can add some serious excitement to your tracks and break you out of that boring cycle, and that is the low end. Getting the bass right is huge in modern music, and doing this well can really add a sense of life and movement to your tracks. So let's get a bass line in here. So that low end adds so much groove and interest to the track overall that you can't imagine what it was like without it. So low end is definitely something you should be experimenting with in your tracks. Okay, now we've got that first bass layer in. What do we want to do? That's right, we're going back to layering. So we're going to layer in a little sub bass in there to add that low end and beef it up even more, give it even more energy. So let's copy our MIDI from the initial patch, drop it down an octave. It doesn't quite match with the original bass because the release is too long. So we've got to change that, get the volume envelope, put the release down. It's adding so much low end. Really beefing out that bottom end, giving it that crunch to punch through on big speakers. That's what we like to see. So now we've got our track coming together, but we're still lacking a little bit of that extra spice and flavour to really cement it as like a vibey, emotional track. So what are we going to do? We're going to get some effects in there. So where do we want to do this? I'm thinking we start with the gated synth and see if we can get any cool ambience and effects on there. Okay, we've kept it fairly simple on these gated synths. So what I've done is just add a little bit of chorus, a little bit of this super VHS plugin from Baby Audio that kind of pushes it out wide, gives it a little bit of saturation, a little bit of wash, and a little bit of pitch drift, and then just tidied things up with a small amount of compression, and altogether it sounds like this. Without the effects, it sounds like this. And with. Just adding a subtle bit of vibe, and I think we go for a little reverb on the top at the end as well, maybe just to spice things up a little bit. What if we go for maybe like a hall reverb? Ooh, that reverb has turned things around. That is so nice. Oh yeah. Now I think we can get a little bit more crazy with this Rhodes. I'm thinking we add maybe a crystallizer and see if we can get some weird kind of textured thing. And then maybe underneath this, we're going to add a little bit of ambience. Ooh. What if we add a little bit of distortion on there as well, using this oven plugin? Ooh. Let's put this into the mix. Wow. And then a little additional tip for you guys. If you want your ambience, like sort of background sounds to still sound really present but not take up too much space in the mix, what you can do is just add a high shelf. That's not a high shelf. You can add a high shelf and then set the band placement to sides. And it'll just boost it in the sides, keep the central channel nice and clear, and that sounds super nice. Maybe we go a little bit higher, like 7K. Okay, another little tip for something you can add to stop your tracks being so boring is just add some ambience, like recorded sounds. So I love to find like rain, maybe traffic noise and stuff, and just put that really low in the mix underneath. So let me show you how that sounds. So we've grabbed this noise sample, which is from Manhattan in New York. At full volume, it's obviously way too much, so we're gonna knock it down in volume a pretty hefty amount. You just hear it it's just adding a little bit of noise. It kind of acts to just like glue everything together a little bit. You don't really notice it in the mix, but if I take it out, you'll notice everything's a bit more flat and a little bit more separated. Just adding that in adds a really nice little bit of energy to the whole thing. Okay, so we got one more way to stop your tracks from sounding so boring, and this is something I used to get wrong all the time when I was learning production, is that I would make a great chord progression, I might make a cool bass line, but then I would kind of leave it there and be like, okay, I don't really know what to do next. but adding some melodic elements, adding some lead sounds, some keys, whatever it might be, even a vocal chop over the top to add a like lead sound for the ear to hook onto is so important to make your tracks not sound boring. So that is what we're going to do right now. We're going to get maybe some synth leads in there and just have fun and experiment as always and see what we come up with. Okay, so we just recorded a lovely Prophet lead sound, so let's take a listen to how that's sounding before we add some of those effects to give it a bit more life. So in terms of effects, let's just have a little experiment. Let's get some EQ on there first, just to shape the sound a little bit more. Now this could sound cool with a shaper box on it. That shaper box is sounding really great. I think we could maybe get some chorus on there as well. So before we go over the before and after, let's take a look back on what we've covered and how we've made our songs less boring and the techniques you can take into your productions from today onwards. So we've looked at chord extensions, changing up the harmonic rhythm of the chords, layering sounds, adding punch and depth with mixing, adding extra effects, and adding melodic elements and bass lines. Combine all of those things in your productions and you should have something that is full of life and definitely not being described as boring. So I hope that's helped, guys. If you want to work together, then I have a limited number of slots available for one-to-one coaching. So check that link down below. Let's take it away and listen to the final before and after. I added a little vocal melody in there to give an idea of what it might sound like as a song. So I hope you enjoy that. But I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.
Conversation with a stranger. Yeah, they told me to chase my dream. Yeah, they told me that I could be